This guy was Germany's worst nightmare. Joseph R. Beyrle signed up in World War II out of Muskegon, Michigan. He volunteered for a suicide mission to parachute down to drop off a backpack full of gold in France. He liked it so much that he did it again. As D-Day approached, he was given another suicide mission to parachute once again to sabotage vital targets to weaken the German response capabilities during the invasion. He was captured and escaped a total of 3 times, each time as a result of Allied firepower nearly killing him. The third time he escaped from a prison camp and swam for 2 miles down a river in Poland in friggin January to evade German police dogs. He later met up with the Soviet Red Army and the first task was to liberate the prison he'd just fled from. He broke in and stole his POW mugshot. He fought as a Soviet soldier for several months before ending up in a Soviet medical camp. Later taken to the American embassy, nobody believed he was still alive. Joseph R. Beyrle had officially died 10 months earlier. His funeral had already taken place. He was passed from Russia to Odessa, Ukraine to Egypt, then to Italy, where they verified his identity using his fingerprints. He got to go home. 2 years to the day he returned from the dead, the same priest, in the same church, performed his wedding. On December 29, 1943, German fighter pilot Franz Stigler pursued an American B-17 bomber leaving Bremen that was clearly crippled. One engine down and the tail was shot to pieces. Franz was instructed not to shoot enemy soldiers in parachutes, and although they had not bailed out of the plane, it was clear that this aircraft was no threat. He couldn't bring himself to destroy the bomber. He fell back into a rear flank support formation so that German surface guns would not destroy the plane and escorted American pilot Charlie Brown outside of German airspace. Once clear of danger, Franz nodded to Charlie and broke off, returning to Bremen. Franz would not tell anyone about this incident for fear of punishment or execution for helping an enemy aircraft. Charlie Brown was instructed to keep this to himself to maintain the narrative that there were no good Germans. 43 years later, Charlie reached out to see if he could locate the pilot who'd spared him. It took 4 years, but eventually Franz reached out to him in 1990. Franz had been living in Vancouver, Canada since 1953, and Charlie lived in Seattle, Washington, only 200 miles apart for all this time. They became the best of friends and both of them sadly passed away in 2008. Over 2,000 Soviet snipers fought in the Red Army in World War II, and none of them as deadly as Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the first female sniper who volunteered in June 1941. The Russians were at first skeptical of letting a woman fight, but they shut their stupid faces when she confirmed 187 kills in her first 2.5 months of service. However, that proved to be just a warm-up. By the end of the war, she'd confirmed 306 Nazis, 36 of which were rival snipers, and one of those took a straight 3 days before eventually she got a clean line of sight on him. Lyudmila was the first Soviet soldier sent to visit the White House and President Roosevelt. She remains the most deadly female sniper of all time. Imagine. The Japanese attack Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and you enlist as soon as you turn 18. 1 year later you're commissioned as a junior officer and possibly the youngest pilot in the U.S. Navy. In your career you rack up 58 combat missions, 126 carrier landings, 1,228 flight hours, and for this particular mission a Distinguished Flying Cross. On September 2, 1944 you're sent with 3 other bombers to destroy a radio tower on the Japanese island of Shishijima. All 4 of your planes get hit by anti-aircraft guns. Plane on fire and cockpit full of smoke. You dive toward your target anyway, confirming a hit before circling back to bail out over the water. With a head injury from your tail rudder, you latch onto a life raft as Japanese boats fight U.S. fighter pilots for 4 hours before finally you're rescued by a U.S. submarine. 8 of the other pilots swam to shore and were captured. You go back to fighting, and on September 1945 you are honorably discharged from duty. You would not find out until 2003 when reading the book Flyboys, that 4 of the 8 captured pilots were eaten by the Japanese. Imagine the look on your face. They didn't even tell you this when you were the president. Oh yeah, your name is George Herbert Walker Bush. How a 17-year-old won a Medal of Honor. While in military school at the age of 13, Jacklyn Lucas heard of the suffering at Pearl Harbor. A cold chill ran down his spine and he became obsessed with standing up for his country. On August 8, 1942, now 14, he enlisted in the Marine Corps by forging his mother's consent signature and bribing a notary. He broke ranks and stowed away twice, first on a train heading for San Diego, and later on the USS Duel headed for the front lines at Iwo Jima. When they landed, the first wave of Americans were cut down by Japanese artillery. On day 2, Jack's 4-man team ran down into a trench, fighting off Japanese soldiers. Jack's gun jammed. He looked down to undo the jam and he saw 2 grenades at his feet. He threw himself onto the grenades, one of which went off, one didn't. He was gravely wounded, wiggling only 2 fingers on his left hand as his sole means of a signal. It was noticed and he was evacuated. Jacklyn Lucas said that all he wanted to do was go home and kiss his girlfriend, and those plans were messed up when Mr. Truman called him to come receive his Medal of Honor. During the ceremony, Mr. Truman said he'd rather have that medal than be the President of the United States, to which Jack replied, "I'll swap you." The one-eyed soldier who liberated the town of Zvala by himself. Leo Major enlisted out of Montreal, Canada at the age of 19. First stop, D-Day. He captured a German half-track full of secret code books and forced the German crew to return it to Allied forces. Later, scouting ahead of his unit, he killed 4 Germans, taking a phosphorus grenade to his left eye. Having to wear an eye patch, which was awesome because he looked like a pirate, stating that he only needed one eye to shoot. Later, while sporting some sweet PT white sneakers, a German officer woke up at gunpoint and was instructed to instruct his men to put down their weapons. Leo proceeded to march 93 of his new German prisoners back to the speechless Allied forces. British Commander General Montgomery promptly awarded him with the Distinguished Conduct Medal. Leo declined because the commander was incompetent. To prevent the mass bombing of Zwolle, which would kill citizens, Leo and his friend Willie went to scout the town. Germans spotted them and killed Willie. In an event that I can only convey as akin to the killing of John Wick's dog, Leo was pissed. He went on a one-man rampage through the town that lasted the whole night. He burned down the Gestapo headquarters. All the Germans in the town either fled or surrendered. He was again awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. This time he accepted. If this is of interest to you, might I suggest this video next?